In this video, we will see how to enter the invoice due date in the AP module when we enter a vendor invoice, and also we were going to see what parameters affect the invoice due date field and what other functionalities are affected by the invoice due date. Okay, so as we are providing the header information for the invoice, we will go to the invoice date field and enter an invoice date. Once we enter that invoice date, as you can see, the due date is automatically populated. After we provide the vendor the invoice amount, we have the possibility of changing the due date manually if required. So we can either leave what the system has provided automatically or change this manually. That's how you enter the invoice due date. Okay, so what parameters affect this due date field? As you can see, the system provided that date automatically. What is driving that? What drives that is mainly this payment terms in the vendor master. For this vendor, for example, we have set it to be NN days net and payment days 30, meaning that the invoice is going to be due 30 days after the invoice date. That's the first parameter that affects this field. The second parameter that also affects this field is in the system tables, the miscellaneous, there is a flag. And this flag, called use receipt date, if we change the flag to 1, the due date will be calculated according to the receipt date and not from the invoice date. The default is that it's set to 0, meaning that the due date will be determined according to the invoice date. So those are the two major configurations that affect the due date. Now, what other screens are affected by the due date? There are two main screens that are affected, or functionalities that are affected by this due date. One is the cash requirements generation here, the cash requirements that you run when you're doing an automatic check process or disbursement process. When you are running this, you're basically selecting invoices that are due on or before a particular date. So if I set here, for example, May 1st, this invoice would be selected because the due date is due on or before May 1st. This invoice is due on May 1st or earlier. Okay. Additionally, another area or functionality that's affected is the aged open payables report. The aged open payables report is going to categorize aging invoice according to their due date. So this due date is going to determine, and depending on for what cutoff date we run the report, where the invoice is going to show up. If it's current, if it's 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, or 90 plus overdue.